For those, I recognize some of you. I think I see some unfamiliar faces. My name is Caroline. I'm from Ascentria Care Alliance, and we teach Ascentria Care Alliance. We're an organization, a nonprofit that's based in Westfield, and we teach nutrition education in schools and adult centers, in a lot of different places throughout Hampden County. So yeah, if this is your first time, I'm really happy to see all of you and for all of you to be here, and for everyone else, welcome back. So today I've passed out a lot of different worksheets, and I hope I don't overwhelm you. I figure it's better to have more resources than less. And if we don't get to all of them, these are just resources that you can look into in your own time and make use of them however you wish. Okay. So today Michelle is with us. She's going to be cooking. And we're going to be making two different recipes. It's a creamy spinach and mushroom quinoa dish, and then kind of for something sweet, a sweet treat, it's a raw cookie dough. So for those who have requested recipes that are gluten-free recipes or just alternative dessert recipes that might have some added health benefits, this is also a good option. And I have to say, for anyone here who might not like mushrooms, because I know it can be a little bit on the fence, Michelle would be a really great example of somebody who is completely convinced to eat this dish. Maybe you can say.
I absolutely hate mushrooms. So to say it frankly, I absolutely hate mushrooms, and I tried this dish because it smelled great. I helped make it, and so I tried it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I actually really, really like this dish. So like it definitely was an accomplishment on Caroline's part, because I would have never tried it ever. If I saw it on a menu somewhere, no mushrooms, I always say ask for everything without mushrooms. Yeah. And I'm saving with onions, but I like shallots now, so getting a broader palette.
Not so good.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different, there are common ways to prepare mushrooms that aren't really tasty, or a lot of people find them disgusting, but this is just a different way to prepare mushrooms, and I hope you find it interesting. It's very mild in flavor, so I
think they pick up the flavors of everything in the dish as well.
And it just adds a softer texture to the quinoa. So, yeah. Yeah, would you want to move down to this?
I don't know that it's going to
make it, okay, I can try and speak up a little bit louder. So, one of the things that we're talking about today is sodium. Who here considers the amount of sodium that they might add to their foods? Is anyone conscious of how much sodium they get in their foods? Yeah. In what way? And did your awareness of your own consumption of sodium come with a health issue, or was that, yeah? So does anyone else think about the amount of sodium they get? Yeah? So we're going to get into some really shocking examples like that. I think your average American is not fully aware of how much sodium they find in packaged and processed foods, and really what the definition of a processed food is. It's not something that you necessarily just find at the grocery store that has a package and was made in a factory. You can find processed foods at a farmer's market. And these are just some considerations and tips that I hope all of you kind of take away from this class today. But before we start, since Michelle is going to be cooking and we're cooking with a different grain, I just want to launch into a little bit about quinoa and what that is, in case you're curious and you see her cooking with that. So has anyone ever prepared food with quinoa, or have they heard of quinoa? Yeah? do you cook it at home?
I had it in that, you can buy a blend of quinoa and different colored rices.
Yeah.
That I've had, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's a different texture.
Yeah. Did you like the flavor of it?
Used to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel I put it in something.
Yeah. Has anyone else heard of quinoa, or do they prepare it?
And soup, it was good.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a really great example. So there are a lot of different, it's a very versatile, it's considered to be a whole grain, but it's actually the seed of a plant that looks very similar to spinach and other leafy greens. So it's harvested in its seed form, and we can prepare it in a similar way as preparing rice. So kind of a 2-to-1 ratio of 2 cups of water to 1 cup of quinoa. Its flavor is kind of nutty. It's mild. It's not a strong flavor. It maybe has a little bit more aroma than a rice. And you can really make it an either sweet or a savory dish. You know, I sometimes cook quinoa in the morning and have like fresh or dried fruit. We'll add milk to it, and you know, like today's dish, we can also make it savory, and it can be the replacement of rice. And there are a lot of benefits of quinoa. Quinoa is not the only grain that you could use to make your starch or your carbohydrate a little bit more healthy, but it is an alternative, and it could just diversify how you cook and what you're eating. It is a complete protein, which means that it has all 9 essential amino acids for our bodies, and it's more rich in nutrients than, say, a rice or a pasta profile might offer. So for instance, it's a great source of magnesium, iron, copper, and phosphorus. And a lot of dishes that you might find yourself making with quinoa, other than just adding them to stews or like stir fries, would also have the added benefit of potassium and magnesium. So for instance, if you're making a dish with quinoa and it has sweet potatoes in it, you're going to have the added benefit of both the quinoa and the sweet potatoes, potassium and magnesium, and this feature ties into the conversation about sodium. So when it comes to reducing the amount of sodium that we have in our diet, and also ways to reduce our blood pressure, potassium and magnesium have great effects on reducing blood pressure, and you know, with a lower blood pressure, we're going to increase our cardiovascular health in the long term, or even immediately. If you're looking for quinoa in stores, you can find quinoa at most stores these days. Before, it was pretty much in select health food stores and bulk food areas. But quinoa nowadays can be found in kind of the natural food section of Stop and Shops. Costco sells quinoa in bulk. Sometimes like Big Lots sells quinoa, or Ocean State Job Lot offers really cheap quinoa. So it can be a more expensive grain, but there also are alternatives and ways of buying it more cheaply than what might be offered in a mainstream market. Yeah, so I would definitely recommend, you know, if you're looking to diversify your diet, do something new, cook with a whole grain. Quinoa is a great thing to cook with. So one of the things that some people, and quinoa has kind of become a fad in many ways. If anyone has looked at, you know, the news, quinoa has kind of exploded as this new fad food, and people claim it as to have a lot of health benefits, and it certainly does, but it doesn't make it any more superior than other whole grain foods. The one thing that quinoa does offer for those who might have a gluten intolerance or sensitivity is that it is gluten-free. And so while we're kind of on this topic of what gluten-free is, I just want to mention that there is a lot of controversy around diets and what the best diet might be for a person, and gluten-free diets. You see a lot of products that are labeled as gluten-free, and many people have asked questions as to whether or not gluten-free diets are the best option for replacing whole wheat or grains in their diet, or some form of wheat in their diet. So in my personal recommendation, when you look at most packaged gluten-free foods, they are generally made of nutritionally, less nutritionally dense foods than a whole grain or a whole wheat food. So for instance, potato starch, tapioca starch, rice flour or white rice flour, often these kinds of gluten-free products are added into, say, your gluten-free crackers or gluten-free cookies, which in the long run actually makes it less nutritionally beneficial for your overall diet. When it comes down to it, if you actually don't have a gluten sensitivity, you're going to be getting and receiving sufficient health benefits from whole wheat flour, whole wheat products, whole wheat bread. And by eliminating bread and condemning it as something that's evil and is doing harm to your diet, is potentially causing you weight gain, you're actually then going to be eliminating and possibly replacing something that does have a lot of fiber and vitamins and minerals with something that is less fibrous and could lead to irritable bowel syndrome, or because it doesn't have the fiber or as much added fiber. Or just simply it's not as nutritionally dense. There is pasta that is made of quinoa or quinoa flour. It is more nutritionally dense than your average whole wheat pasta or white pasta, certainly. And it's excellent. It cooks up just like normal pasta would. You can make it al dente. You can kind of cook it to a softer. It holds together well. And the flavor, I would say it's fairly neutral. I haven't noted an incredibly strong or nutty flavor. I would say that it's more mild than even whole wheat pasta, which I don't know the comparison of carbohydrates in quinoa to whole wheat pasta or refined pasta, but quinoa does have carbohydrates in it. You know, choosing a gluten-free food can be really beneficial if it does have the nutritional profile that you're looking for. So, kind of moving on a little bit to what we're going to be talking about today, I'd like to talk about the role of sodium in our diet, because at large, Americans consume far more sodium than we're actually supposed to be consuming. And probably about 80% of us are consuming more sodium in our diets. And in fact, the main cause of added sodium isn't from the salt shaker on the table, which is what a lot of people believe, because many of us do add some extra salt to our foods. How many of us have that kind of staple salt shaker on the table? No? Maybe when you were younger? Yeah. So it's actually from the majority of our sodium and added sodium in our diet is from going out to restaurants, packaged foods, and processed foods.
So what do you think about
DASH? I wanted to talk about that. So DASH is a diet that was recommended for somebody who may be at risk or currently has hypertension. And it essentially just follows guidelines of eating whole grains, legumes, beans, fresh fruit and vegetables, and minimizing as much processed foods as possible. It doesn't have a specific food plan on a day-to-day or a meal-to-meal basis, but it's a guideline for improving your overall kind of making more like weekly goals of how you're eating and consuming. The idea of DASH is really great, but I think it can be really difficult for an individual to practice those eating habits on their own, maybe without the guidance of a nutritionist or a dietitian who's actually able to make those evaluations of what any individual is consuming and kind of where some of the hidden levels of sodium might be. I'm actually not, so I don't know the difference sodium level, if there are different sodium levels between types of salt. Are you aware of that? Pink Himalayan salt has claims of having added nutrients, you know, so sea salt certainly I would assume has more added nutrients, but in terms of the amount of sodium, I'm not sure how that compares.
No salt.
No salt?
No salt is the name of it. There's no salt. There's no
Yeah, it's like salt, there's like this diet salt, right? It's kind of like a diet salt that you're adding the flavor of salt, but the sodium, there's no sodium in it. So it's all chemicals.
So yeah, and my assumption with
Yeah.
that, again, I haven't looked into
sugar.
exactly, which is going to have effects on our bodies or our energy in whatever way that might be. You know, I certainly wouldn't recommend having a diet soda because of the aspartame in it and the unclear side effects that it has and long-term side effects that it might have on our bodies. And similarly, anything that might be labeled as diet, I'm very wary of because it often has chemical derivatives in it. But yeah, that is a very good question. And the DASH diet, just going back to that for 1 second, it's if you're making the steps to make those changes in your diet, it can have impacts on reducing your overall blood pressure. And if you're reducing your overall blood pressure, you're then going to be making steps to improving your heart health, whatever that might be for you personally. But it's kind of a holistic, you know, you have to look at it holistically. And I think our tendencies is to automatically go to exercise and food and medicine kind of in those steps. And it is a conversation that you should have with your healthcare provider to determine what those steps should be for you. But yes, that along with many diets that might promote eating whole foods, it is a good option. So what exactly, when we're thinking about processed food, what comes to mind as processed food? We kind of talked a little bit about this earlier, but what comes to mind? TV dinners, yeah, great. Sorry? Yeah, Anything else? Boxed foods, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm always shocked when I think about what a processed food actually is, because it's not, as I said earlier, just something that comes in a package. A processed food could be something that you make at your house. Say, for example, you're making a cake batter. That flour was processed, that sugar was processed. All of those ingredients, or many of them, were processed in some way. So even though we might be cooking from scratch, what we put in our food can come from processed places, even in the less obvious ways. So that's just something that I think is really important to consider as we're making an evaluation of where our food comes from and whether or not we're really evaluating the amount of sodium that is in our food. So, for example, you know, I was telling Michelle earlier, like I eat a lot of sauerkraut or pickles. You know, that's just something I really like. I like to eat, and I was thinking about it, and it's like that's actually a processed food. That, I mean, it has added salt to it. It's not, you know, it seems as close to, you know, the form of a vegetable, and has great health benefits. You know, sauerkraut has probiotics. It's good for your body, but there's a lot of salt in it, and it's processed. So what are some ways that we can actually make a determination to figure out how much sodium we're actually getting into our diet. Does anyone have any ideas? Or what do you do personally to regulate the amount of sodium in your diet? Frozen tends to have minimal or no salt because it's just been blanched or steamed, but it can have salt in it. You just have to look at the nutrition labels. But it tends to be a lot lower in sodium overall compared to canned vegetables. Fresh is always the best way to go, but it's not always the cheapest and not always the easiest or most convenient. So my next, like for me, the next best option is frozen because there's a lot you can do with it. You can store it well. It saves you a lot of time. Yeah. Yeah. Do you consider adding up the amount of sodium that you consume on a daily basis? You don't? Yeah. I think so. There's a sheet. It says, where's the limit? So for your average adult, you want to try and keep your sodium intake at less than 2,300 milligrams per day. But if you're pre-hypertension or you have hypertension, you actually want to kind of cap it at 1,500 milligrams. So what does that actually look like? That's 1 teaspoon of salt per day. So again, that's also kind of 1 teaspoon of salt per day.
Yeah.
So that's in all the food that you consume, it's 1 teaspoon. And most people probably consume over 3,000 milligrams of salt per day. Even, you know, a child at age 2 is probably consuming more sodium, upwards of 3,000 milligrams of sodium per day, and that far exceeds their amount of daily sodium. Which I just find completely shocking. So one of the best ways to start, because this can be a really daunting process if you're not currently kind of calculating or trying to make changes in the amount of sodium that you consume, is just by looking at nutrition labels on all the foods that you consume. So we have a sheet that is labeled how much sodium is in that package. A nutrition label is found on all packaged foods. So you can find it on canned tomatoes, you can find it on a bag of chips, on cookies, even fresh vegetables have nutrition labels. They might be labeled at the grocery store if you're buying them loose, and if you're buying them in an already prepackaged bag, usually on the back they have nutrition labels. And it will say on the top of the nutrition label the serving size. And the serving size is really important to consider because a bag of potato chips is going to have upwards of 16 servings in it. So when you're reading the nutrition label, you have to consider the serving size first and most importantly. Potato chips might be the more obvious example, but a soda might be less obvious because the size might be around 16 ounces, but the nutrition label might actually be specified for an 8-ounce drink. So companies are really deceiving in how they're trying to convince us that their product is more healthy than it actually is. But when you're looking at whatever's below the serving size, you can find the calories, the fat, cholesterol, sodium, carbohydrates, fiber, and sugar, and protein. The sugar, sodium, and fat are things that we want to pay attention to on a nutrition label because those are the three big things that we want to try and reduce the amount of. So we want to reduce the amount of sugar, amount of sodium, and amount of saturated fat because that's really what we're trying to look out for. That's the kind of fat that is going to be harmful for our cholesterol levels. Otherwise, different things on a nutrition label that you should try and increase is the amount of fiber, the amount of protein, added vitamins and minerals, and then anything specific that you personally might need to add to your diet, you can often find on the back nutrition labels, whether it has it or it's just absent of that. So in the sodium category, if you move your finger over, it will tell you your daily percent value. So in this food, I don't know what it is, it's unlabeled. It says that it has, for 1 ounce serving, which is possibly cheese, since it's, this nutrition profile looks like it could be cheese. The amount of sodium is around 12%. So if you were to consider all the different types of foods that you're eating in a day, you know, the sandwich meat and the cheese and the lettuce that you might put into an assembled sandwich, and you're calculating for those types, for the serving size and the amount of sodium, you could calculate your own sodium intake. And it would be laborious, but it would at least give you an evaluation and a baseline for where you might be at if you don't have if you're not aware of that. Nutrition labels also have an ingredient list, and in the ingredient list, they'll use many different words to describe what salt is. So in this ingredient list on the bottom of the page, salt is disguised as salt enzymes, disodium phosphate, monosodium glutamate, which is also known as MSG. MSG is a form of salt that is often found in fast food restaurants and Chinese food, and some people have really negative reactions to it. They might have headaches, feel nauseous, sick. So whether you're going out to eat at a restaurant or you're looking at the back of a nutrition label, it's really important that you come to understand all the different words for sodium or salt, and recognize it as such, because it can help you make the determination whether or not that food is going to be something that you should or should not eat. This is just a really interesting example, sodium content of a sample daily menu. So this is a menu, it has breakfast, lunch, and dinner on it. For breakfast, the total amount of sodium after having bacon and eggs, a bagel, 2 tablespoons of cream cheese and orange juice is at 1,200 milligrams of sodium. We have lunch, which is a ham and cheese sandwich, a slice of American cheese, 2 slices of whole wheat bread, mayonnaise, mustard, a pickle, chicken noodle soup, saltine crackers, and a diet energy drink. And lunch, its total is 2,400 milligrams. So already just lunch alone has exceeded the amount of daily sodium. And this dinner has spicy crispy chicken drumsticks, crispy chicken breasts, a biscuit, baked beans, coleslaw, apple pie, and a soda. And dinner far exceeds the amount of daily sodium at 3,400. So this person's daily sodium is around 7,000 milligrams, which is almost triple the amount that we should have on a daily basis. And I think that this breakfast and lunch and dinner could look a lot like what maybe one of our meals or some of our meals look like on a daily basis as well. Yeah.